Hey everybody, welcome to another episode. I'm your host Chris Shang, and today we've got Todd Caponi, who's founder and speaker of Sales Melon. Thank you so much for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Can't wait to get nerdy with you.
Yeah, of course, man. So tell us a little bit about what Sales Melon is. What do you do? What is the kind of topics and conversations that you tend to cover, and who do you work with?
Yeah, so a longtime sales and sales leader and a full-time nerd. Like, I don't know how that happened, but really got deep into behavioral and decision science, and then went on a tangent during COVID and got really deep into sales and sales leadership history. For anybody who's watching this, I've built almost a mini museum behind me. But today, for the last 6 years, I've written a couple of books, but I speak and teach organizations around how to leverage that decision and behavioral science for good, not evil, in your selling, your messaging, your positioning, your negotiating, and the way that you lead.
Awesome. And is there like a specific type of company or organization that you tend to work with, or is there like a certain time like where they're experiencing a specific type of pain that you see as like a good match for what you offer?
Yeah, it's funny. I was focused mainly on tech for the first few years, but the challenges go so far behind or beyond that. And so really the companies I focus on are normally mid to larger organizations where there's an opportunity for them to leverage this stuff to build the revenue capacity of their teams. And so any kind of customer facing organizations, mid to larger. And I'm doing a lot of kickoffs. I think I've got 12 already scheduled for first quarter next year, but I do a lot of programmatic work for organizations over the year too.
Got it. Very cool. Um, yeah, would love to. I mean, before you kind of like decided to go down this tangential nerding out on buyer behavior, where does your background come from in terms of sales, right? I feel like everybody kind of has their own unique journey, specifically around like sales and marketing of how they land up there. But like, what was yours like?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was in sales forever. I think he'd be 102 now, so he's been gone for a while, but like he always just loved it, right? And had great relationships from it. So I always thought that was cool. But I certainly had the perspective and the perception that to be in sales, I needed a plaid coat and some gold chains and like, hey, and like, so I didn't want to get into that. But in college, I went to Indiana University and I remember being in a marketing class. So I went and got my marketing bachelor's degree. And a woman came in that was from the Indiana Daily Student, which was the university newspaper. And she's like, hey, we're looking for salespeople. And I was looking for a job. And I was like, yeah, I'll go figure that out. Like, go talk to them about it. And I ended up selling advertisements for the university newspaper. And I discovered that I loved it. And
Mm.
so graduating from college, I went and got a sales job. And the rest is history. But, did that for 10 years, discovered that I liked this teaching and helping organizations. So I sold everything I had. I bought a sales training company and promptly ran that right into the ground. But coming out of it, I just had such a different perspective on optimizing revenue engines, working with all these different companies. And so I immediately, coming out, my first job was in sales operations, got promoted to being a VP of sales pretty quick. And, that was um, 18 years ago. And so I've had 7 different leadership roles since then, took a couple of companies public as a
Mm.
participant, like I wasn't the impetus behind that, but had a couple of good acquisitions in there too. And that's really where it started from, is that one woman coming into my marketing class and advertising their sales role to sell advertising.
Very cool. And what do you feel like it is that, I mean, obviously saw your dad do it and you really kind of saw the relationships he was able to get out of that experience. But like, for you personally, maybe before the epiphany around, because I feel like that's maybe like the true calling is like really going deep around the buyer behavior. But like, what would like before that, you were still doing sales for quite a long period of time. What was that pre-epiphany kind of experience like? What were you seeing in terms of like, the value that you were getting out of it? How did it tie to your own personal value and belief system that you were like really still excited and pumped about doing it, period?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a good question because, the perception, you grow up in high school and college. I mean, there's a reason why 100 years ago, sales was taught in universities.
Yeah.
It was taught in high schools. Like in the 1910s, it was taught in multiple Boston area public schools. Why did it go away? Because the perception changed and that sales was gross and that it was about convincing people and jamming solutions down their throat. And, I saw my dad do it the opposite, which was, you know, coming home, a little stinky from his 2 martini lunch and, going out and just hanging out and having fun. And I'm like, is it going out and boozing or is it being gross? I found really quickly it was right in the middle, right? That it was focused on helping customers achieve optimal outcomes and teaching them, being a partner to them, and in the process, building great relationships that last a lifetime. And so it was really that combination, see my dad, see what the world thinks, but in truth, the people that do it the right way do it right in the middle, and I tend to really enjoy that.
Got it. Very cool. And then walk us through kind of, you going through that epiphany of going really deep around, from the pandemic and like what was that journey like for you in terms of like, you know, I love geeking out about like buyer behavior too. I think like behavioral science and just like understanding why people make the decisions that they make, regardless of even buying, right? I think like in every transaction, every action that we choose to do, it's like emotionally driven, and that emotion is triggered by some external thing that then triggers something inside of us internally.
Yeah.
But walk us through your own realization about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happened. I was the chief revenue officer of a company here in Chicago, where I'm based, where it's like a blizzard outside right now, by the way. But um, the company was called Power Reviews, and you could
Yeah.
probably guess from the name we were in the review space. So you've interacted with the tech before. You buy a pair of Crocs or a sweater on Vineyard Vines or 1,000 other retailers and brands. You look at the product, you scroll down, there's reviews. We were the engine behind the collect and display of
Mm,
those. What happened was a few years ago, we did a research study with Northwestern University, just looking at, all right, when a website's acting as a salesperson, like on a retail site, what do people do, right? Nothing to do with B2B or human to human selling, or so I thought. We do the study, 3 data points came out of it, 2 of which changed my life like could only happen to a nerd, meaning I quit my job and like a lunatic wrote a book called The Transparency Sale. Like a book I thought would suck because I'd never written a book before. And what did I know about writing? But here I am 6 years later, still selling and talking about it. But here was the 3 data points. All right. So number one was no surprise. We all
mm,
read reviews. So when we're going to buy something we've never bought before that's of medium to high consideration, we go do our own research beyond the claims of what the marketer or the website or the product people, the salespeople say. No
mhm.
surprise. But here's the 2 that changed my life. Number one was that almost all of us go to the negative reviews first.
Yeah.
So we skip the 5s and we read the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s first. I'm like, all right, that's interesting. I do that. But then the last data point was that, and this is across all product categories, but on a 5-star scale, when a
Mm,
product has an average review score between a 4.2 and a 4.5, that's optimal for purchase conversion. Meaning a product that has negative reviews right under it sells at a higher conversion rate than a product that has nothing but perfect 5-star reviews. Now,
interesting.
we know in our gut that, yeah, if I see a product that's got nothing but perfect 5-star reviews, I don't really believe it.
Yeah.
But that's when a website's acting as a salesperson. Does the same thing happen in human to human and B2B selling? I started digging into the research, not that smart. So I found like a neuroscience professor at another
Mm,
university here just to help me vet it. And all signs pointed to, well, yeah, when we lead with that negative, remember, we all need the negative first. That's what we do. When we lead with it and position our solutions as, hey, here's what we give up to be great at our core. Here's what you might not like. Here's the risk. Here's what a competitor maybe does better. Here's our price point. When we do that, we disarm, we help buyers predict, we speed sales cycles, we win more often because we're qualifying in better and faster, but we're qualifying out the deals we're going to lose anyway faster. And then you create an extra differentiator in the way that you sell. And so we started trying it, and suddenly we became Chicago's fastest growing tech company from 2014 to 2017. And I'm like, man, it feels good to be honest, sure. But as it turns out, it sells better to be transparent and to
yeah.
be a truth teller to your customers. You build trust, customers buy, stay, buy more, are more likely to advocate when we do that the right way. And I figured I want to get these ideas out there and I don't want to create the impression that we should be going into sales engagements with like, hey, this is why we suck. Like, no, the 4.2 to 4.5 is an important range. Let's not overdo it. And so I felt this kind of drive to like, let's help people figure out the right way to do that. And in the end, if there's a quote from one of my books back here from 1921, my
Mm,
favorite sales quote of all time. So a guy named Arthur Dunn, he's got a book called Scientific Selling and Advertising. There's a page in it that only has one sentence. And that one sentence is this: if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it.
mm,
Right? Like, it's such a powerful quote, but that's the point. If our
yep,
product sucks, we shouldn't be selling it, but it ain't
yep,
perfect. And when we can configure the way that we engage with our customers in a way that illuminates that imperfection and leads to the what we're so good at and why customers actually buy from us, that's when the magic happens.
yep, absolutely. So interesting. What's some of, I guess, like outside of the blanketed obvious in terms of like when you're honest, it sells better. But like, what are some of the other? Because obviously, you could. I feel like there's. You mentioned this in the very beginning and preface this, which is like using it for good, and it's a very powerful tool. This idea of transparency, right? Because there's a way to position where it's you are using it in fact as a tool and you're disguising something that may not provide real value in this like transparent way, but what's something that you've kind of discovered in terms of like how powerful this idea can be and then how to actually use it in the correct way, and then what are some instances where you've seen it been used in a negative way?
Yeah. So to start, I mean, the one real revelation for me was, growing up, I always thought that sales was about convincing people.
Yeah,
But turns out we don't buy when we're convinced. We actually are trying to predict. Like,
yeah,
we buy when we can predict. And once I kind of flip that lens and go, all right, my role is to help individuals predict what their life is going to be like with this. In some cases, teaching them about what maybe they never thought possible. And so, like, that's where it all started.
mm,
But again, I was teaching a workshop once, and I was talking about this idea that, like, I got an inbound lead from a massive tech company. The CRO reached out through his admin, and I get the happy ears. I'm like, oh crap, like, this is awesome. This could be a huge deal. I get on the Zoom with him, and he starts by saying, hey, Todd, heard great things about you, but here's what we need. He started laying out what he needs. It's stuff I don't do. I could do it. And I told him that. I was like, hey, listen, if you need that, I could probably do it. But if you made a list of the top 50 people that do that, I'd probably come in at about number 47. Can I
mm,
connect you to the top 2 or 3 that I know and they're fantastic at that? And the guy was like, uh, yeah, that's awesome. Like, all of a sudden he's all fired up. But then he comes back around and he's like, what is it you do? Like, what's your focus? And so I took him through that. And I ended up getting a massive negotiation deal with them, did a whole division of the organization. Now, as I'm telling that story, I remember looking, so during the workshop that I was teaching virtually, in the chat, somebody wrote, no. And I'm like, hold on a second. Somebody just wrote no. What's going on? Like, and what happens on this call stays on this call. She explained to me, she's like, hey, Todd, economy's tough. If we get a client and it's something we can do, we got to go get that deal. And I said, all right, cool. You got it. Congratulations, you hit your quarter. But what happens when they figure out that maybe you weren't the best choice for that? And she
mm,
said, we managed through the dissatisfaction. I burst into tears, right? I was like, wait a second. You got that one deal. Congratulations. But I'm telling you, in this environment right now where we're in this feedback economy, where the proliferation of reviews and feedback and peer connections has never been louder and more pronounced. You get that one deal, it's going to cost you 4 deals that you never even knew existed because they're not calling you. They're not even considering you. And so we've got to play the long game here and help buyers predict whether it's with us or with somebody else as quickly as possible. Now, to the last question there. So again, I'm being, if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. I've seen people kind of, there's a couple of things. Number one is, maybe it's a pet peeve, but I'll see people on their website saying, why you shouldn't buy from us. I'm like, shut up, right? Like,
yeah,
the role is to aligned to your customers, sit in their shoes. I don't know if you can sit in people's shoes, but stand in their shoes and go, if I'm in this individual's shoes, what am I going to like and what am I not going to like? We've got to set proper expectations. So that's number one. Number two thing where I see people go wrong is to say, hey, here's what the competitor does that we don't, but here's why that sucks. Like, no, that's not up to us to decide. It's up to them to decide. And in many cases, I've literally presented what a competitor does as though I work there. Because again, the outcome is what matters. And that's where your customers stay, buy more, and create advocates for you. You lose that deal, but maybe it earns you 5 or 6 others through referrals and through the reputation and trust that you build.
Yep, makes sense. Um, I feel like also nowadays, and maybe this isn't as pertinent to the types of companies that you work with because you're working with more established institutions, but there's such a fast wave of new technologies, new businesses being spun up now. It's becoming more easy and easier, and especially with the AI revolution and all that kind of stuff. But I think like what I've also noticed is there and this is probably with like every kind of like wave, like we saw this in the late 90s with the internet boom and the bubble there, and everybody's just kind of jumping on it, and there's a lot of like over promising and then under delivering. What are your kind of like thoughts on that in terms of like earlier stage companies of like how much to thread that needle around like faking it till you make it versus like actually delivering real tangible value? And obviously I think it behooves you to overpromise because like that ends up like affecting your churn and your retention, and those are like obviously big metrics from a growth and then like an investment thesis, right? So
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I was advising a startup a few years ago, and we had worked on, all right, listen, who do you think is going to be the ideal client for this? And we
yeah,
worked through it, and I was like, who do you know is not? And we had determined this company was going to sell to retailers that were kind of mid-size because too small, probably not worth it. Too big, they're going to be a nightmare. And so it was kind of like this 100 million to $1 billion range. All of a sudden, so I do my monthly call with the CEO, the founder. He gets on. He's like, "Dude, Nordstrom just came in as an inbound lead," and he was so excited. And I'm just like, I'm listening to him. I'm like, "Is that good news?" He's like, "Dude, it's Nordstrom. If we get that deal, it's gonna like that's gonna be amazing." And I was like, "Remember what we talked about." Remember this idea that Nordstrom is going to freaking bull rush you. They're going to take over your roadmap. They're going to run you ragged. You've got how much runway? And they're like, probably 15 months. All right. You're going to burn 6 months of runway on this thing. He's like, Todd, F off. I'm going to go. I'm like, all right, cool. Sure enough, what happened? Well, the second question I asked him is, hey, do they know that it's just you and a buddy sitting in a garage? And he's like, no. Like, I'm not telling them that. I'm like, you have to. Like, you don't think that when they say yes, they're going to want to look into your books? Like they're relying on you for checkout technology. Are you crazy? And so he didn't do it. And literally, they burned 6 months of cash. They rejiggered their whole roadmap. Holidays come around. What does Nordstrom do? Shut down. We're going to revisit this in January.
yep,
January comes. What happens? Everybody's changed roles. They just reorganized. And the
yep,
6 months is gone. I'm like, dude. So the whole fake it till you make it thing drives me bananas. Lead up front and just go, hey, listen, there's a reason why we're having this conversation, Nordstrom or whoever it is.
yeah,
We're confident in our technology, but you got to know it's just me and this buddy in this closet here. And if that's going to be a problem, can we talk about that now versus 6 months from now? That's where the magic comes in. Again, win fast. If they're like, yeah, that's going to be important, we should probably look at that now. Lose fast. If it is a big deal, now you get your inventory back that you can convert to revenue, which is your time. It's never going to be any earlier than it is right now. I've seen more companies spin themselves down the drain, over promising early by pretending to be bigger or more significant or a better match for a company when they're truly not. Get that out now. Build the trust and lose fast.
yeah. Um, you speak to a lot of companies earlier those or like those type customers when they need to start more downstream and then work their way upstream. Um, can you talk us a little bit about how you think about like buyer behavior and stages for companies? Like should a company kind of like identify the lowest hanging fruit for ICP and then work their way up that ladder?
Well, here's the other thing. I used to preach something in my organizations. I call it extreme firmographic focus. What I mean by that is when you're starting out, it's hard to know exactly who to focus on, right? And you believe that your ICP could be big, small companies, could be this industry, could be all over the place. And as a result, it becomes really hard for you to wake up in the morning talking to 5 different industries, 5 different buyer personas. Like that will drive you bananas. One of the things that we did in one of my startups back in 2008 was we could sell to manufacturers. You build stuff, perfect, right? But that means that each one of my reps had 5,000 accounts on their list. Like that's insane. We had sold and had some success in aerospace and defense initially. And so we did this exercise where I was like, hey, listen, let's become experts in aerospace and defense for a while. Let's do a sprint around it. What that meant is we went and hired a seasoned veteran from the aerospace and defense industry just to teach us everything that we should know about that space. So what are their headwinds and tailwinds? What are the different roles and how they're measured? Where do they go to get smarter on their business and their role? What does their inbox look like? So we brought this guy in. We then did a case studies on our current aerospace and defense. We focused, like we brought in a couple of customers to do a lunch and learn with us. The next thing you know, my reps with their 800 accounts, who are they prioritizing every morning? Aerospace and defense. But the magic is this idea that confidence begets confidence. They would be able to walk in to a VP of manufacturing at Boeing, for example, and be able to teach them something. Now, you couldn't do that if you hadn't had that focus. The next thing you know, we were doing like 3 million in revenue. We did a $7 million deal with Boeing, and then we got Northrop Grumman, and then we got Cessna, and then we got Gulfstream, and all of a sudden we're growing 400% year over year. And then we expanded out slowly, did another 400% the next year, and then sold the business to SAP. The point being, yeah, establish your ICP and figure out where you're going to be the right fit. But I would encourage you to do those sprints and become experts because, again, your role is to make them smarter about their business and their possibilities, not yours. Lead them to your solution. Don't lead with it. And I'm telling you, the rest is just magic.
Yeah. I feel like it's something I always preach to, which is like becoming an solver for the buyer, right? So it's like whatever you're selling, whatever your solution does at best, and this is being generous, it's going to solve maybe 10% of their day-to-day problems. And so they're dealing with 90% of these other things. And if you cannot speak to them in their way, in their terminology, it forget about even building trust. It automatically creates a sense of like distrust of like this person doesn't even know about this industry, has not spent time in it, doesn't understand what I'm dealing with, right? And I think a lot of like sellers become overly, especially like on the more junior level. I mean, those that are like so focused on the quota and the output, and it's like this catch 22 of it all, right? Because it's like the more they're focused on those selfish reasons, the more of an uphill battle it tends to be to get to the customer and get them to convert, versus again coming in from more of that like transparent altruistic perspective, and it ends up like leading people down that conversation path a lot more quicker and a lot more at ease than it is otherwise. uh I guess like to that point is, when have you worked with different companies or organizations where you've seen that be one of the biggest blockers, and then when they kind of come to that similar epiphany of being that type of a seller, how have you seen that reap dividends for them?
Yeah, I mean, this just happened. This is probably some shameless self backpatting, but I was working with, and continue to work with, company. They're a mid 20 billions organization that helps with facilities management with companies, and they were working on an opportunity in a new region for them, which is Canada.
Mhm.
And it was in a space that they weren't exactly experts in, facilities management for a massive conglomerate of retirement homes and communities. They got an inbound RFP, and it was them plus their two biggest competitors, both of which have a bigger presence in Canada and have more experience in that facilities management for retirement communities. And so we were talking, and they were like, Todd, and I was like, if you look at this RFP right now, based on what you know, what are your odds of winning this? And they're like, 0%. Like, all right, cool. And so what I encouraged them to do is to go lose fast and like, hey, reach out to them and just go, hey, we're looking at this RFP, and it makes a lot of sense what you're trying to do. Before we spend the time responding on this, can we just talk about this idea that, listen, we don't have much of a presence in Canada. We don't have a ton of experience in that space. We think we would be a great partner for you, but if that's going to be the thing that checks the box as to whether you're going to work with us or not, can we just address that now before we respond? You read it, we fly up there, all of that stuff. And apparently the client was like, hey, let's talk about that, right? And suddenly they got engaged with it. The client was okay with those things, still wanted to hear from them. They are now on the cusp of winning that deal. And it's a multi-million-dollar deal, huge opportunity to open up a space and a region for them. And the client has told them over and over again, hey, you're treating us like a partner. They're treating us like a customer, and they're a vendor. Just that feeling, again, that trust. Lay it out there. And if that client would have said, hey, yeah, we need somebody who knows the space and has got a definite presence up here, they would have said, cool. Our percentage of winning was 0 before. Turns out to be true. Now they're right on the cusp of winning, and they believe that that's going to happen. And it's all about their approach and their willingness to share the truth up front.
Absolutely. Interesting. I know we're kind of up on time, but just last question here, with all these shifts in the macroeconomic environment and, with technology across the world, you know, where do you think this idea of like transparent selling and transparent leadership is going in the next few years to come?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, you've heard the phrase buyers know more nowadays, right? You see that all over the place. That's actually in this book right here from 1910.
Mm,
Right? In 1910, Thomas Herbert Russell, in his book Salesmanship, Theory and Practice, theorized that, hey, because of the rise of mail order catalogs, this is a 1908 Sears Roebuck catalog, which is basically like Amazon in print form. You could buy literally anything in here, including modular homes. The threat was mail order catalogs and advertising meant we wouldn't need salespeople anymore because they could get at their own information. Well, what happened? The profession flourished. To your point, in the 2000s, specifically in 2015, Forrester proclaimed in their annual State of Sales report that by 2020, 1 million B2B sales jobs would go away, and hundreds of thousands of college students wouldn't graduate into the profession. Why? Because buyers
mm,
know more nowadays. And what happened? The profession flourished again. Now, AI is, again, doing the same things where now buyers know even more. Is that a threat to the sales profession, and where does transparency play? I would argue that more information available to buyers hasn't made it easier on them. It's made it harder. It's given them
mm,
more work. It's driven more status quo decisions. If we think about our role through that lens of, listen, my role is not to convince you. My role is to do the homework and provide a service for you, where I'm the one that's coming to you saying, hey, listen, here's what we do well, here's what we don't. Here's what we give up to be great at our core. Here's the problems. Here's the risk. Laying all that out up front, I'm telling you, you are going to differentiate in the way that you sell, but you're going to speed sales cycles because, again, we don't buy when we're convinced. We buy when we can predict. You are that vessel to create that prediction, but it happens only if they trust you, and they will trust you more when you are willing to share the things you give up front. That's where things are going now, to the point of, if the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. 1921. We've always known that honesty is better, but now, because of the proliferation of information, you got to do it, and it's only getting louder. Now is the time to embrace it. That's why I wrote the book when I did, because it wasn't like, hey, be honest, cool. No, we got to figure this out right now, and that's only getting louder and more pronounced. And so I guess that's and I'll leave you with one last quote. It's my second favorite sales quote of all time. It's from 1911, the book right next to it, a guy named Arthur Sheldon, in his book, The Art of Selling, 1911. The quote is this: "True salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go." Right? We're providing a service. If we don't forget that, you're going to have a long, healthy career. Or if you're a smaller organization, the long game will help you win the long game. But in the feedback economy, it helps you win the short game too.
Mm, love it. Awesome. On that note, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your insights and just such interesting topic of conversation around it. Thank you for sharing your time and and being just transparent with us in terms of like what you've learned.
Awesome. Oh, it's great to be on here. Thanks again.
Thank you.